Tonight on Ukraine Today. Massive attack on Ukraine. Russian forces killed at least 7 people, including 2 children, and dozens were injured. The weapon of diplomacy. The debate over Tomahawks for Ukraine showed the real levers of pressure on Russia. A plan to end the war. Ukraine and Europe are preparing a 12-point document. What does it include? Talks in Budapest. Why is there a high chance that the Putin-Trump meeting will be cancelled? All this and more, right now. Hi everyone, my name is Volodymyr Robchun. Please subscribe, hit that like button. Let's move to the news. Massive Russian attack on Ukraine. At least 7 people were killed, including 2 children, and dozens more were injured. Many residential buildings were hit, as well as energy infrastructure. The attacks targeted the Kyiv, Odessa, Chernihiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kirovograd, Poltava, Vinnytsia, Zaporizhzhia, Cherkasy, Kharkiv, and Sumy regions. In the Kyiv region, Russians killed a 37-year-old woman, her 6-month-old baby, and a 12-year-old niece. Their bodies were found under the rubble of a private house. Later, another victim died from injuries, a 38-year-old man. In Kyiv, a Shahed drone hit a high-rise apartment building, killing an elderly couple. In Kharkiv, the occupiers struck a private kindergarten, a store, cafe, office building, and several cars were damaged. At least 1 person was killed and 9 were wounded. Earlier in Sumy, a Russian drone hit a road. 12 people were injured. Cars, power lines, and other infrastructure were damaged. Emergency power cuts are in effect across several regions, and trains are running with delays. The discussion about Tomahawks turned out to be a strong investment in diplomacy. These are the words of President Volodymyr Zelensky, his evening address, commenting on Russia's desire to continue the war and terror.
The front line can become the starting point of diplomacy, but Russia is once again doing everything to escape diplomacy. And as soon as the question of long-range capabilities for Ukraine moved just a bit away, Russia almost automatically became less interested in diplomacy. This is a clear signal that this very issue, the issue of long-range weapons, may hold the key to peace. The more long-range capabilities Ukraine has, the more willing Russia becomes to end the war. Recent weeks have confirmed this once again. The discussion about Tomahawks turned out to be a strong investment in diplomacy. We made Russia show that Tomahawks are exactly the card they care about. We will continue talking with our European and American partners about long-range capabilities.
Ukraine's defense forces have struck the Bryansk chemical plant, a facility producing explosives and components for rocket fuel, making it a completely legitimate target. The results of the strike are being verified. There were also reports of a hit on an electrical substation. In Dagestan, the Dagnotek oil refinery was damaged, and in Smolensk, a fire broke out at a thermal power plant. Over the past day, Russia has lost at least 1,050 troops killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,133,250 occupiers. In the last 24 hours, Ukrainian forces also destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 11 armored vehicles, 12 artillery systems, and dozens of other enemy assets. Ukraine is preparing the Crimean peninsula for de-occupation. Next, how it's happening and what awaits the invaders there.
After a hard, long and exhausting journey that has truly tested the strength, patience and determination of everyone involved, Crimea and Sevastopol are finally returning to their home harbor. This moment is not just the end of a difficult path, but also a significant and emotional homecoming, bringing a sense of relief and hope to all who have awaited this return.
And that harbor is Ukraine. Crimea is being cut off from the Russian Federation, and the collapse of the Crimean bridge is just a matter of time, according to Western publications. There is already a total fuel crisis on the peninsula. Some areas have been left without electricity. There isn't enough air defense even for the most important sites, and those that remain in the chaos are now shooting down their own planes.
We note that as a military base, Crimea is becoming more and more inconvenient for Russia because there is no water.
So the past few days have marked a new reality of life on the peninsula. The key event was a series of strikes in the area of Hvardiiske, where after precise hits, a major CND, the largest oil depot in this area. According to locals, the burning depot in Hvardiiske could be seen from the suburbs of Simferopol, with the glow visible for many kilometers.
In Hvardiiske, there were strikes not only on the oil depot, but also on the military airfield, as well as on the Russian garrison located there.
According to information circulating online, an ammunition depot on the garrison's territory was also hit. In addition, the oil depot near Feodosia has also partially ceased operations. Due to several attacks just this month, 11 fuel tanks have been completely destroyed, as evidenced by satellite images.
Why is the story about the Feodosia oil depot so important? Because it didn't just burn down on its own, it burned down with the fuel that was stored in those tanks. And that will be very difficult to restore. It's unclear what exactly was there. Diesel fuel or gasoline. But if it was gasoline, which is most likely, it means that the crisis this week in occupied Crimea will be much worse than it was the week before. So, we wait.
At the same time, each such strike is notable for the fact that it's almost impossible to extinguish the fire. Experts say that the burning fuel spreads across the base, igniting neighboring storage tanks. And so the fire can go on for days.
The landscapes of Feodosia now decorate almost the entire eastern part of Crimea. They say the flames can be seen from 30, and in some places even 50 kilometers away. Everything, it is said, is burning to the ground. The base needs to be shut down. This is the recommendation for the occupying Crimean authorities, who have also confirmed that there will be no gasoline.
There will be no diesel either, local authorities add. Since the beginning of the week, diesel fuel has also disappeared in Crimea, local activists report. Under these circumstances, the promise of the head of the occupying Crimean administration, Sergei Aksyonov, to stabilize the fuel supply situation is simply impossible to fulfill, added Z propagandist Alexander Sergeyev. At the same time, the authorities are desperately trying to conceal the real picture of what is happening in Crimea. Thus, just over the past weekend, police officers drew up at least 4 administrative reports against residents of the peninsula for posts on social media. People in particular were outraged by the lack of fuel. Interestingly, Russians themselves are partly helping the Ukrainian armed forces to identify targets in Crimea. Experts have analyzed that now these targets can be found simply by opening maps on the internet.
Remember when Yandex.Maps started blurring all sorts of strategic sites? I said that now it's absolutely clear where exactly to strike. Well, my friends from Inform Napalm noticed that the Special Operations Forces did exactly that. The territory of the oil depot in Gvardeyskoye was blurred on Yandex, but for some reason that didn't help against the strikes. Mystical. Once again, thanks to all the Russian decisions that help increase the effectiveness of Ukrainian strikes. Blurring military sites on Yandex Maps is definitely one of them.
Another decision that contributes to the regular strikes in Crimea is the work of the defense forces targeting Russian air defense sites on the peninsula. Just recently, the GUR managed to strike the Occupiers' newest radar system. We're talking about the Valdai complex, which was developed to detect small drones.
The SBU continues to systematically reduce the enemy's military, logistical and economic ability to do anything, both in occupied Crimea, in other occupied territories and even on Russian territory itself. But Crimea suffers the most, because the air defense system there was deliberately destroyed. Their ability to defend themselves was reduced, and now we are working as if inside the body.
By the way, so that the occupiers in Crimea don't get the impression that everything will go back to normal, along with oil depots and military equipment, the Ukrainian armed forces also didn't forget about the equipment that supplies electricity. Russian bases. In several regions of the peninsula, Ukrainian defenders organized blackouts.
At night in Crimea, several electrical substations were put out of commission. And in particular, the main power substation in Zhankoi, or Zhankong, as we used to call it in Crimea. So now rolling blackouts are being introduced. And here Putin is being shown in no uncertain terms, yet again, that if he continues to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the occupiers in Crimea will be left without electricity and fuel.
And the cherry on top, during one of the latest attacks, the Russian air defense crews got so nervous that they started firing at everything in sight. As a result, one Russian fighter jet worth about $50 million was lost.
During a nighttime attack by Ukrainian drones, Russian forces shot down their own Su-30SM aircraft. This happened right in the area of the Gvardeyskoye airfield.
At the same time, there's no good news for the occupiers when it comes to air defense. Analysts note that recently there have been more strikes on Russian territory itself, prompting a decision to partially redeploy air defense systems from Crimea back to Russia for protection.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is a good moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video, and please share it so more people can see the truth. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. Rubio and Lavrov will continue preparing a possible Trump-Putin meeting, reports the Wall Street Journal. According to the publication, the US Secretary of State and Russia's so-called foreign minister will both attend to the ASEAN summit in Malaysia later this month. The White House says no separate meeting has been planned so far. I guess it'll go like this. They'll meet behind the scenes. Lavrov will say Russia wants all of Ukraine, but can start with Donetsk, Luhansk, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia and Kherson. Rubio will not fly back to Washington, report to the US president, and Trump will be disappointed in Putin. Again. Insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Just saying. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom is ready to allocate over £100 million to deploy troops in Ukraine. But there's one condition, a peace agreement between Kyiv and Moscow. The question is, what will London do if the Kremlin refuses to stop the war? Details in our next story.
London is already preparing for the possible deployment of troops in Ukraine in the event of a peace agreement between Kyiv and Moscow. This was stated by the UK Defence Secretary John Healey. It is also reported that the United Kingdom is ready to allocate more than £100 million sterling, equivalent in Ukrainian hryvnias. This amount is more than 5.5 billion hryvnias for the possible deployment of their troops in Ukraine.
First and foremost, this is meant to demonstrate that these countries are ready to promote peace, but I think for now it feels like this is more talk than action, because if we recall from the beginning what Emmanuel Macron was talking about, what France was saying about sending troops, there was even the idea that this would happen during the full-scale war, but the purpose was to help the Ukrainian army not be distracted by those areas where there are no active hostilities. This refers to the border with Transnistria and the border with the Republic of Belarus, where troops would be deployed. This would be presented as the direct involvement of European countries in the war.
Healey spoke about the efforts of the UK and France to form a coalition of the willing consisting of 30 countries, which in the future is preparing to deploy forces on the territory of Ukraine.
Well, regarding the principle that the Europeans had promised and committed to from the very beginning, it's essentially to provide Ukraine with support and assistance as much as is needed, for as long as is needed, and for however long it takes, without hesitation or limitation. Unfortunately, as is sadly well known and obvious to Ukrainians and to the world at large, this has not come true. And the saddest part of this story regarding the ongoing and deeply troubling situation is that it remains unresolved. This potential, an armed group of peacekeepers, or what in Europe is sometimes referred to as boots on the ground, meaning being physically present on the territory in question. Unfortunately, this also follows the same principle. That is, they make a lot of promises, which sounds wonderful.
The British are convinced that the forces sent to Ukraine will help ensure the security of the country's air and maritime space. The plan of the British minister provides for the training of military personnel to participate in multinational forces that will secure Ukraine's borders. However, this is only possible if Russia agrees to end the full-scale war.
When French President Emmanuel Macron and the British Labour leader Keir Starmer met together in London back in the month of August to to gather, sorry, it was actually back in September, if I recall correctly, to gather as many allies as possible, as many supporters as we could find, really. In the preamble of this treaty, in the agreement of this initiative, there were very cunning and very dangerous words. That is to help either with specific armed forces on the ground or with some other kind of material assistance. And this or, unfortunately, allows most of these European partners to, of course, express their support for Ukraine in its struggle. But specifically, when it comes to troops, when it comes to military assistance in the form of direct involvement in the conflict, unfortunately, this allows them simply not to fulfill that part.
In addition to post-war planning for aid to Ukraine, Britain is also helping our country right now. Just this year, it was announced that the British have provided a record amount of aid totaling £4.5 billion. Additionally, together with the United States, the United Kingdom has shown leadership in coordinating a broader group of countries that are supplying Kyiv with weapons and financial support. In September 2025, the United Kingdom provided Ukraine with military assistance amounting to more than $1.3 billion. These funds were allocated from frozen Russian assets. The country's governments noted that this made it possible to supply hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, hundreds of air defense missiles, spare parts, and to sign new contracts for the maintenance and repair of equipment and vehicles.
Britain, which understands perfectly well that after leaving the European Union, it needs something that will allow it to return to the global game. And so essentially by helping Ukraine, this brings the United Kingdom back into the list of global players, which is what it wants. And that's why even something as simple as them more demonstratively lifting restrictions on the use of their weapons is significant here. And providing it to Ukraine is also, in my opinion, an argument in favor of Britain's growing role in global politics, and that Ukraine's victory in this war will not only be a victory for Ukraine, but also a victory for the United Kingdom, which Britain understands perfectly well.
This Friday, October 24th, a meeting of the Coalition of the Resolute will take place in the capital of the United Kingdom, London. Preliminarily, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is also expected to join the meeting.
Russia has tested its nuclear triad involving land, sea and air components, apparently to demonstrate its peaceful intentions. Dictator Putin claimed it was just a scheduled exercise. And of course, we totally believe him.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Ukraine and Europe are drafting a 12-point peace plan, reports Bloomberg. According to the outlet, the document includes a ceasefire, the return of all abducted Ukrainian children, prisoner exchanges, security guarantees for Ukraine, funding for reconstruction, and a fast track to EU membership. Sanctions against Russia would be gradually lifted if there are no violations. Implementation of the plan would be overseen by a council headed by the US President Donald Trump. The document is still being finalized, so it might change. And to bring the end of Russia's war against Ukraine closer, Europe is stepping up the pressure on Moscow. This Thursday, the EU is set to adopt its 19th sanctions package against Russia. What's inside and how could it affect Putin's regime? That's next.
Europe is demonstrating resolve. 3 major decisions are coming very soon. A new package of sanctions, a rejection of Russian oil and gas, and even the use of Russian assets. The EU is tightening pressure on Russia, knowing that the terrorist state only responds to strength.
We are seeing Trump's efforts to establish peace in Ukraine. Of course, all these efforts are welcome, but we do not see Russia truly striving for peace. Russia only understands strength and negotiates only when it is truly forced to do so. That is why, of course, we are discussing what else we can do.
The new package of sanctions in the EU will be approved as early as Thursday, October 23rd. This is the conviction of the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. The package will differ from the previous ones. The restrictions will affect 3 key areas at once: energy, financial services, and trade. The change in approach to sanctions was already mentioned at the beginning of October by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. According to her, the EU will no longer propose phased sanctions, but instead wants tougher measures. However, quick results should not be expected. The new restrictions are designed for the long term.
It cannot be said that the 19th package of sanctions, which is still expected to be adopted this week, is truly groundbreaking, since a number of its provisions have a delayed effect. Well, for example, the refusal of Russian LNG starting from 2027. And we have to understand we are now in October 2025. Accordingly, there is still more than a year of transition period left.
Things did not go smoothly with this package. The main obstacle, unexpectedly enough, turned out to be Austria. Vienna had previously refused to agree to new restrictions unless the European Union unlocked part of the Russian assets to compensate Austria's Raiffeisen Bank for fines imposed by a Russian court. But no one supported Austria's demands, and the Austrians radically changed their position. Surprisingly, even Hungary is not planning to block the new package.
We have no plans to block it. We managed to remove all measures that would contradict our national interests.
Trump's actions, his successes in the Middle East, all of this creates an additional political backdrop and a certain incentive for some opponents within the EU itself to, well, talk less about blocking anti-Russian sanctions. For example, we can see that Hungary has ultimately given in. But obviously there are also the direct relations between Orban and Trump.
However, while Hungary did not block the 19th package of sanctions, it did try to influence the decision to abandon Russian gas and oil. Slovakia did the same. The day before, the EU Council supported a complete rejection by the European Union of the use of Russian fossil fuels. The decision was supported by an overwhelming majority of votes, but not Hungary and Slovakia. However, their vote was not that important.
Fundamental decisions must be made by consensus, meaning the agreement of, yes, all 27 members of the European Union. But for a number of important issues, a qualified majority is considered to be sufficient. That's 55% of EU member states, who together represent more than 65% of the total population of the European Union. Therefore, in this case, we understand that a number of issues are still being shifted to the level of a qualified majority.
The proposal in question provides for a legally binding ban on any imports of gas from Russia, including liquefied natural gas, after January 1st, 2028. At the same time, imports of new gas from Russia will be prohibited starting from January 1st, 2026. However, for existing contracts, a transitional period is provided, short-term contracts until June 2026 and long-term contracts until the beginning of 2028. The EU Council, as we have already mentioned, supported the proposal despite 2 obstacles. Now the matter is up to the European Parliament. It must approve the document. But these are not the only blows to the economy of the aggressor country. In addition to future revenues, Europe also plans to seize the Kremlin's current funds. This concerns the frozen Russian assets. Part of this money is planned to be used to provide a loan to Ukraine.
This is not about confiscation. In other words, they are working out a way that would allow the use of the principal of these assets, but at the same time not confiscate them. So, if or when the Russian Federation pays reparations to Ukraine, access to these very assets will then be restored.
According to Western publications, work on this issue intensified after the talks between Trump and Zelensky on October 17th. Allegedly, the president of Ukraine was pressured by the American leader. And it seems that the EU has decided to become more assertive so that they too are taken into account. Already this week, politicians will try to reach an agreement on the use of frozen Russian assets.
They will definitely discuss it. I don't expect a decision just yet, since there is still time according to previous agreements. But it's clear that for the budget, years 26 and 27, it will be absolutely necessary to adopt serious consolidated options. And we perfectly understand that at this point in time, the West simply has no other choice but to go down the path of a reparations loan for Ukraine, because the required funding is truly enormous.
Whether European politicians will be able to reach an agreement remains an open question. But Europe's determination in its recent actions gives hope. The EU is not going to unquestioningly listen to Trump, but is ready to provide help and take action.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.